So we know that the number one thing that we should do before giving a speech is to know your audience. We should do that. You'll probably hear me say that a number of ways, hopefully. But it's before you decide on your topic, it's before you decide what your research is going to be, or where you're going to go, or what you're going to do, or how you're going to introduce, or even before all that, you have to know who you're speaking to. And sometimes, depending on your speech, you're going to have a sense of that audience and know where they're going to land. Now, not always, but to the extent that you can, you should try to know your audience. There are three audiences that I want to talk a little bit about right now. And those are the favorable audience, the indifferent audience, and the opposed. So let's first talk about the favorable audience. Basically, when you are speaking to someone who's going to be speaking to a group that you know is going to agree with you. For instance, say you're going to do a speech about why dogs are great. Okay. Most people are going to agree. Well, many people have dogs. They love their dogs. I rarely have any students who have ever said, "Oh my God, I hate dogs." No one says that. So you're going to be talking to a favorable audience. But especially when you're talking about persuasive speech, it's great that someone might agree with you. But for instance, you want to be able to talk about what's next, to reinforce what we already believe to be true, and also get them to a higher level to tell us what's next. One example of a situation where we see this a lot, talking to favorable audiences almost always, is within a church or a mosque or a synagogue setting. So when leaders are speaking within those settings, people who go there, it's an elective setting. So most of the time it's going to be a very favorable audience. The only reason they come back is because you inspire them to what's next. If we only said, "Oh, okay, we agree, you can all go home now," then what would be the point, right? So we want to be able to reinforce what is believed, yes, but also what's next. How do we call someone to a higher sense of living and so on? Okay, what if you're talking to an indifferent audience? Okay, probably not, hopefully not, like what I just said, a church, a mosque, or a synagogue setting. But if you're talking within an indifferent setting, where people have to listen for various reasons, the thing that's really important is pathos. So that means you need to be able to connect to someone's emotions. You need to have a sense that you're pulling people along a little bit, not in a manipulative way, but just that they're able to connect with you emotionally somehow, so that your indifferent audience can turn more into a favorable one, and you can get them to do what's next. So I've talked a little bit about favorable and indifferent. Now I want to talk about opposed audiences. An opposed audience is tricky, and probably many of you will be perhaps talking to an opposed audience, or at least half the audience will be opposed for some of your persuasive speeches. I just want to say this because I think it's really important. A lot of students are like, well, what if I say something that my professor doesn't agree with, that I might be opposed to? I don't care. Honestly, your grade will not reflect whether or not I agree with you. I have certainly over the years had a lot of students give speeches where the premise was something that I personally did not agree with, but they did beautifully on the speech because they were able to use facts and support themselves well. And they were able to share their own stories and so on. So when you are talking to an opposed audience, say you have a really tricky subject that some people don't agree with. You really have to focus on your points of similarity. Basically, there are a lot of points of similarity, even within, let's say, for instance, even within the Republican versus Democratic platforms. Obviously, those are opposing forces, and we are certainly divided in many, many ways right now in this country. But one could say we do have points of similarity. I mean, for instance, we all care about the country, or at least we say we do. So that is a point of similarity. If we rely on facts, not opinions, that's another way to really connect with your audience. And then finally, one way to really connect with an opposed audience is if you share a story of some kind. Sharing a story can be a very powerful thing. So let me just reinforce, let me just say one more thing about that, and that is that a lot of people can argue with your facts, they can argue with your statistics, they can argue with your reasoning. They can't argue with your personal story. I think that's an important thing to remember. So let me just review that. We've got a favorable, an indifferent, an opposed audience. That for our favorable audience, we want to reinforce points of similarity and also tell ourselves what's next. For the indifferent audience, we want to have an emphasis on pathos and emotion. And also for the opposed audience, we want points of similarity. Also, we want to emphasize facts, and we want to share our personal stories. Along those lines, as you're considering your own topics, I always want you to think about, what is your story? What connection do you have to this topic, this thing that you say you care about? I've had students do things that they do not care about, and we will know. I had a student last semester, for instance, who did a speech on school uniforms. And it was clear that he did not care about school uniforms one bit. Nope, didn't care. And so afterwards I said, did you go to a school where there were school uniforms? He said, no. I said, oh. Did you, do you have siblings, or do you have cousins, or what? Like, how did you choose this subject? And he said, oh, I just Googled it and it came up. That's never going to be a good speech, because he didn't care, and consequently we didn't either. And so that might sound like kind of a rough thing for a professor to say, but it's true. If I speak about something I don't care about, you're going to know it, unless I'm really good at faking. You're going to know it, and I'm going to hate my life for a minute, because why would I want to speak about something I don't care about? Why would I want to speak about something that doesn't impact me whatsoever? So really think about that. Think about what you care about, what your passions are, what your life has spoken to you. How have you spent your time? What do you look at YouTube and so on? And speak out of those experiences instead. So, see you in the audience.